from the West Wing back to the Pentagon. 24 years, or 24 years and some months after your first tour of duty at the Pentagon, you return, and this is pre-9/11. I'm stepping us back to before 9/11. You take it as your mission to produce defense transformation. This is the term of art. And you quote...
I didn't take it as my mission. The president gave a speech in the campaign at the Citadel. He said precisely what he wanted. When he asked me to come into the Pentagon, he said, that's what I want you to do.
You accepted the commission from the president.
Exactly.
All right.
Now you're talking.
And we've got, I'm quoting from the speech, the president's speech. Our heavy forces must be lighter. Our light forces must be more lethal. All must be easier to deploy. This starts before 9/11, but you're in office for some 6 years. How much progress were you able to make?
Oh, enormous. Enormous.
Describe that.
I would be happy to. Just if there nothing else happened, movement from the division army structure to the combat brigade, the brigade combat teams, is enormous, and it enables our country to do things we couldn't even begin to do under the division structure.
And make me as a layman understand why.
Well, you're able to move around and almost interchange as replaceable elements that are fully capable that are much smaller, rather than if you wanted anything smaller than a division, you had to take it out of a division and then take the logistics and all the support capability with it, which leaves the rest of it useless.
Right.
So it is enormous what General Schoonmaker did. Second, the growing use of and capability of UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, are not an accident. We put beef behind that, and we increased the number and capabilities of those weapon systems enormously. And today, as a result, we have a capability that we didn't even begin to have. We'd gone through 8 or 10 years where the Defense Department had been drawn down. And the intelligence community, I should also add that. I mean, we criticized the intelligence community. They'd had their budgets reduced, and that called the bathtub. The end of the Cold War, we can relax, it's the end of history, let's draw down. Right. And then comes 9/11. And what do we have to deal with? We have to deal with what we were left with, what had happened in the preceding decade during the drawdown. Now, third, special forces. When I came in, we immediately began strengthening our special forces, increasing the numbers, adjusting the assignments they have, and taking some of their lower tier assignments and assigning them to the regular forces, conventional forces. We increased their equipment and enormously. We increased their authorities enormously. And here we are in a world, the 21st century.
And you did that fast, because by Afghanistan, which happens right away, it's months after you take office, by Afghanistan, you've got units on the ground that have obviously had an enormous amount of room for making their own decisions, their own maneuver, calling in airstrikes, and so forth.
But today, the special forces of the United States of America are enormously capable and represent a significant asset for our country.
The surge. Last big topic for which we'll have time, alas. What does it say about the Pentagon? Again, what's the lesson here? That the surge is developed pretty largely. Frederick Kagan, who's at the American Enterprise Institute, Jack Kane, who by then is a retired Army Chief of Staff, Vice Chief of Staff, he's retired from the Pentagon. What does it say that the surge, which the President of the United States announces in January 2007, has to come from outside the Pentagon?
Well, we surged, if you will, increased by some 5, 10, 15,000 troops several times earlier. The question is, why did what the President did, and God bless him for doing it, have the effect it had? And I think there are several answers to that question. I was a latecomer to the surge.
Skeptical, or?
Well, I was working with the military people, and we talked, and there was no one who was recommending that in coming up the chain of command in the second half of 2006. I was constantly, you go to the website, you'll see memo after memo where I say to people, do we need more troops? Do we need fewer troops? Should the troops be doing something differently? Asking these questions over and over again. Now, no one was recommending that we surge coming up in the military chain. The Hadley and Crouch in the White House.
Steve Hadley was National
Security Advisor, and Crouch was the deputy. Began this process, and I will tell you why it worked. I have thought about it a great deal, and I must say I have enormous respect for President Bush deciding to do what he did. But the reason surging didn't help earlier, and did help in the last half of 2006 and early 2007, is this, essentially. First of all, it's not just the number of troops, it's what they're doing.
Right.
What is their role on the ground? And I think that the military commander, Petraeus, fashioned a role that made sense for that moment. Second, Solder, for some reason, went quiet.
We don't know why.
No, stopped making mischief. Third, Maliki's government was maturing, and he demonstrated it by going into the South and actually going after some of the dissidents, which was a good sign. Fourth, Petraeus had been in charge of organizing and training and equipping the Iraqi security forces. And we'd gotten up to over 300,000, I think is the number, by the time you got to late 2006. They were then, for the first time, really in a position to cooperate with our military and help out. Mm-hmm. Then there is something that's not metaphysical, but psychological. The center of gravity by then had migrated almost away from Iraq towards the United States. Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, said we've lost the war.
Right. Oh, I see. And
the Congress was about ready to cut the funds off.
Right.
So you had, before I go to that, go back, one other thing I didn't mention was there was an awakening among the Sunnis.
Right.
They got tired of the Al-Qaeda. The Al-Qaeda were raping their families. They were taking their businesses, and the Sunnis started saying, well, we can have a role in the new Iraq, and we're tired of Al-Qaeda, we don't want them. So that added to all of these other things that came together to make the surge work. Now, what else happened? When the president boldly did what he did, and Jack Keane
announces the surge in January.
Jack Keane did have a role in it.
Right.
There's no question about that. But what happened was it galvanized opinion in the United States. Here was a president who wasn't looking for a way out. He was looking for a way to win. And that told the people in the country, like magnetic particles, oh, gosh, there's a leader there.
Right.
And that made the ones who were like Biden wanted to divide the country of Iraq up into three parts, right. and what's his name, Reid, said we've lost. It also galvanized opinion in Iraq. If you think about it, you remember magnetic particles and you use a magnet?
Right.
All of a sudden things started pointing. So if people don't know what's going to happen in Iraq, should they be supporting the government of Iraq? Well, if they're not going to win, if the United States is going to pull out, why should they? And then President Bush comes out and says, by golly, we're going to put more troops in, and we're going to win this thing. And all the magnetic particles started pointing towards the Maliki government. It had a very positive psychological effect.
This strikes me as a very important question. I'm not sure I can formulate it very tightly or well. But the question is, so the surge, in your view, was not a matter of finally getting it right.
Oh, no.
All kinds of... So let me just put it to you in a counterfactual. Last point on the surge. If David Petraeus had been commander on the ground from the get-go, what would have been different?
Well, we might not have had the Iraqi security forces trained and equipped as well as they were, because that's what he was... First, he was a division leader, and he did a very good job. Then he trained and equipped. Now, I don't know the answer to that question. That's a road we didn't go down. Yeah. But the idea that if you have a hammer, everything's a nail. Right. So there's certain people say, oh, more troops, that's the answer. It wasn't the answer. There were lots of things that came together to make that work. And I think it is I discuss it in the book at some length. I think that the documentation I've supplied on the website supports that. And I think it was a brilliant act by President George W. Bush, and he deserves a lot of credit for it.